Hello and welcome. We're excited to have all of you here today. We'll give folks just maybe 30 seconds or so to get connected. While we're waiting, we would love to have you tell us where you're joining from and how many people are watching at your location in the chat. Welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you. And please tell us where you're joining from in the chat. We'll give it just a few more seconds before we get going. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're so excited to have you here for the Polar Steam Cool Connections live stream. I'm Melissa Barker, the Outreach and Engagement Lead from Polar Steam Program. And I'm going to just share a little bit about Polar Steam, and then we'll dive into the main event for today. Polar Steam is an NSF-funded program that is based at Oregon State University and facilitates virtual and field-based collaborations between polar researchers, educators, and artists to enhance science communication and broaden the reach of polar science. A recording of this live stream will be posted on our YouTube channel. And today we're going to keep the focus of our event on the experience, on the science and the experience on the ice. But I do want to tell you also, I want to mention that our artists application for Polar Steam Antarctic Artist and Writer Program are now open. And we'll have an Artist Information Center session on April 30th. The educator applications will open in mid-May. And we are currently recruiting NSF-funded polar researchers for the 26-27 collaborations. If you have any questions about our artist, educator, or researcher programs, please refer to the information on our website. Today, we are zooming in with two of our Polar Steam Fellows, Bethany Wilson and Ignatius Rigor, from Utqiagvik, Alaska. So you can see in the very top corner, left-hand corner of the screen in the red circle there, that's where they are. And they're currently experiencing a blizzard. And so we're opting to do this from inside versus out in the wind so that we can actually have better connectivity. We'll start with a presentation from our fellows and then follow with a Q&A session after that. We invite folks to submit questions in the chat. Our team will monitor these questions and will address them and any other questions that were submitted ahead of time through our Google form after the presentation. So now I'd like to introduce Ignatius Rigor, who is a climatologist at the Polar Science Center Applied Physics Laboratory and an affiliate associate professor in the School of Oceanography at the University of Washington in Seattle. Dr. Rigor studies sea ice and how it interacts with the atmosphere and ocean. He also coordinates the U.S. Interagency and International Arctic Buoy Program. Bethany Wilson is a senior education specialist at the Detroit Zoo. She also serves as a governing council member and educator with the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. Bethany is spending a week with Ignatius and his team on the sea ice. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ignatius and Bethany to tell us about what you're doing up there and how it's going and what the experience has been like.
Oh.
Well, good morning, everyone from here in Alaska. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join us and learn a little bit more about Polar Steam and the polar science that we're working on here in Alaska.
Yeah. Hello. So the main point of the trip this time was to host some 8th graders from the local middle school, the Hobson Middle School, out on the sea ice. And then we also were testing some of our instruments and then after the 8th grade field trip.
So like Melissa said, we are currently under a blizzard warning. So we are going to be showing you some photos on the screen today since we can't safely be out on the sea ice. So if Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide. As you can imagine, conditions in the Arctic, although Ignatius was telling me that it's actually quite mild this time of year here in Utqiagvik, are quite harsh. And so we have been traveling by snowmobile or snow machine, as you see on the screen. With wind chill, it feels like negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit today out on the Arctic sea ice. So bundling up with proper Arctic gear is a must. And it does make science a little bit more challenging here in the Arctic, but with the proper gear, I think, have been very successful this week in our endeavors.
Yeah, so this picture shows Bethany on one of the snow machines we use to get out to the sea ice. And then that tent in background is one of the local whaling teams preparing to go out onto the sea ice to, set up their camp to hunt.
Yeah. Can you go to the next slide, Melissa? Thank you. So Ignatius is going to share with us a little bit more about the science that his team does here in the Arctic and elsewhere.
Yeah, so the Arctic Buoy program, we basically put weather stations out on the Arctic Ocean all over the place. The Arctic Ocean is about the size of the U.S. And if you look at the lower 48 of the U.S. And so across the lower 48, we have thousands of weather stations over the Arctic Ocean. There's only about a couple hundred. And this is what our program does, is to try to get as many weather stations out there as we can. So in the spring, like right now, we'll take snow machines, like on the lower left picture, out on the sea ice and to deploy our instruments. We'll also take helicopters out as shown on the upper left. And then our typical buoys look like in the next row of pictures. Basically, they measure GPS positions. They transmit the data by satellite. There's air temperature sensors at multiple heights, usually 2 meters, 1 meter, and at the surface. The big orange buoy on the next picture is a buoy deployed forecasts, but also long-term monitoring of weather. And then we'll also fly with various air groups, like in the pictures here on the right are from the U.S. Coast Guard squadron out of Kodiak, but we also fly with the Air National Guard out of Alaska and the Danes and the Canadians. But yeah, we get a lot of logistics of opportunity from the aircraft and icebreakers going in, without which we'd never be able to maintain this array. Next slide. Oh, yeah. So speaking of the Air National Guard, we had a flight in January and we landed in Barrow to fill up the gas tanks and then fly further out. The buildings on the left are actually where we're staying right now. And we're, let's see, you may not be able to, let's see if I can annotate this. We are in there. Did that show up? Hopefully it showed up.
Yes, it did. It did. That's great.
And then we took the 8th graders out to this pan right here. Yeah. And then, but basically right behind the buildings is Elson Lagoon, brackish water. The high spot along here is actually a road that goes out to Point Barrow. And then this part of the sea ice is what we call landfast sea ice. It doesn't move, and so we could run around here on the snow machines. This stuff here is drifting ice, so we will not cross this line because we'll never get back.
All right, Melissa, will you go to the next slide? So these are some zoomed in photos kind of showing you the where we're at location wise, and you can see that differentiation between the land fast sea ice that Ignatius was talking about as well as the sea ice that's actually flowing. And this ice will eventually break up and thaw, but right now pretty well frozen. So if you can go to the next slide, it's just going to keep zooming in a little bit more so you can get a perspective of how far out on the sea ice that we have been throughout our trip. And then one more, please, Melissa. Perfect. So in this area, this is where we actually took the 8th graders from the local middle school to do some place-based education. So if you can go to the next slide, we'll tell you a little bit about the goal of the field trip. So these are some warming tents and the team working to set up and prepare on Monday. And then we actually brought out about 65 middle school students. They were all in the 8th grade. They live here locally in Utqiagvik, and we were doing place-based education with them. So if you can go to the next slide, we have researchers from all different disciplines, and they held a variety of stations from learning about remote sensing to biology that lives under the sea ice to folks who live in the community talking a little bit about Indigenous knowledge and how that relates to science and our relationship with the natural world. And so in this picture on the right-hand side, these are actually students, and they are learning to drill some holes in the sea ice, and they learned how to measure sea ice thickness. We also measured some snow thickness and density, and learn about a whole bunch of different science disciplines related to the Arctic that I didn't even know existed, which was a really cool experience, not only for myself, but I think for those students who, yes, they live here, but they may have never explored the sea ice before. They might not understand how dynamic and important it is. And to also expose them to some STEM careers and STEM disciplines that maybe are going to interest them in the future. If you can go to the next slide. So these are more photos of students. These students are actually working with Ignatius to drill some holes in the ice using a drill bit. And then they are using that measuring tape to actually measure all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, which was fascinating to me. It's quite shallow in this area, and then also to measure that sea ice thickness. And who doesn't like using power tools? So the students were all incredibly engaged, and I think that they really enjoyed their experience out on the ice. And then if you can go to the next slide. So this is a picture. One thing that I have found really, really cool is the relationship between the researchers and the community. So this little black speck you see on the right-hand side, this is actually a bear guard. So this is a community member who comes out, and their role is to support us by ensuring that we're safe out on the sea ice. They're keeping an eye out for polar bears. Yes, there are polar bears aplenty out here, and this allows us to focus on the science and collecting the data. So that relationship is incredibly important. And it's also really cool to interact with them and hear about their experiences. They live here, and so they have a different perspective about the Arctic and about the sea ice. And that has been a really enriching experience to interact with them. All right, if you can go to the next slide. These are just a few more photos of students collecting data out on the sea ice. And then we'll talk about the following day where we actually took this data into the classroom and made sense of it. Because you can collect data in science, but if you don't have a meaning toward it, then what is the point of collecting it? And if you can go to the next one. This was probably one of my favorite stations. This is a remote sensing station where students were deploying kites. And on these kites, there were a variety of cameras and sensors that were able to collect things like thermal imaging of the ice, which was a really cool experience. Who knew flying kite could be a part of science? All right, next slide, please. Perfect.
So on the next day, on Tuesday, yesterday, we were supposed to go into the class, but given the weather forecast and the blizzard warning we had for today, half the team went out to the sea ice and did the measurements that we had planned today. So On the left there, we have a bunch of snow machines ready to go out and a sled with all our equipment. And then they picked a ridge out on the sea ice. And here they're scouting out the ridge. And on the right side, they're scouting out the ridge and planning, how to deploy these instruments and take the measurements that we needed. Next slide.
So these are students in the classroom. So on the left-hand side, this is a pair of students. We actually collected sea ice cores out on the ice. And on the Arctic sea ice, at the bottom level of those sea ice cores are actually algae. And this algae is home to millions of microscopic organisms. And so we actually melted down the sea ice along with that algae. And these students are now looking at things like diatoms, there's bacteria in the sea ice, and it's really the basis of that Arctic food web. So when you look at the Arctic, it looks pretty devoid of life, right? It just looks like snow and ice. And so having students see that there are living creatures in a very dynamic ecosystem that live and thrive in the ice was really cool. So that's what those girls are doing there. We also talked a little bit about snow science. So in the center, you're seeing students learn about various types of snow. Yes, there is more than one type of snow. And then they simulated an avalanche. And this is a real world application of knowing types of snow, knowing about snow safety and what could cause an avalanche. Up in the upper right-hand corner, which I'm sure Ignatius will talk a little bit more as we get through our presentation, is a student decorating a wooden boat. And those wooden boats are deployed along with the weather buoys. And then in that bottom right-hand corner, we learned a little bit about density. So freshwater is a different density than salt water. We learned about oceanography and internal waves that happen in the ocean as well. So a lot of hands-on in-lab experience happened yesterday. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I mentioned on the previous slide that one of those students here in Barrow was decorating a wooden boat that gets deployed along with the weather buoys that Ignatius talked about. Well, I had the privilege just a few weeks ago to travel along with the Detroit Zoo and our conservation partner Conapac to the Peruvian Amazon. And so my students in the Amazon rainforest also decorated some boats. And so these are kindergartners in a rural community along the Amazon River decorating their boats. And then I brought them with me to the Arctic and they got deployed along with a weather buoy yesterday. So that's been a little bit about my students' experience and contributions to the program, along with obviously interacting with all of those 8th graders the past 2 days. All right, next slide. And this is us deploying those wooden boats. So you'll see we lay them out in the sea ice. The boats themselves don't actually have trackers, but we assume that they float along with the buoy. You can see the buoy in the eye of that orca whale that we designed out there on the sea ice. And so we assume that those boats are going to float along with that buoy. And so you can, if you participate in the program, track your boats and see where they may end up. So these are boats from students both in the United States and my kids from Peru. And then there on the screen is a boat that I decorated in honor of the Detroit Zoo.
Yeah, and you can see the web page for the program on the boat. It's basically floatboat.org.
Awesome. Next slide, please.
And so after we deployed the boats and the ice team was still doing their survey, I decided to take those that weren't needed for the ice survey out to the point. And so we, let's see if I could draw this here. We basically came out from the survey site and drove up this road and tried to get to the point, which is here. This is the northernmost point of the United States. But on our way up, we saw this bear and we're not able to get to the point because once you see a bear, you basically have to stop, and so we don't harass them since they're an endangered species.
Mhm. Yeah, so that was a really cool privilege. So you'll see the photos. There was one bear and then there were two bears. So it was a very cool experience yesterday out on the ice, especially coming from the Detroit Zoo where we house polar bears. It was very cool to see them in their natural habitat. All right, next slide, please. And then, of course, it's beautiful here in the Arctic. So the sun sets much, much later than it does in the lower 48. From my perspective in Michigan, it's getting dark 8:30, 9 o'clock during the summertime. But here it doesn't get dark until maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And then the sun just comes back up. So you never feel tired. At least I don't, which I think is a positive working in the Arctic. There's lots of daylight, so much time for activities. And then, of course, beautiful sunsets like Ignatius captured yesterday.
Yeah, and so we have a couple more things on our plan. We're hoping to, do some more ice surveys with our equipment. One of the other things I want to do is like here, this high spot here is the whale perch. And so every couple years they do a whale census to count how well the population of bowheads is and other marine mammals. And so that's a high spot on the ice. And so they put a tent up there and they're basically counting critters out on the open ocean. So just past that tent is the open flawley that we showed in earlier images.
Awesome. Next slide, please. And I just put this picture in here because I thought it was funny. So you saw those beautiful pictures that Ignatius took with his telephoto lens of the polar bear. Well, this is my version of the polar bear photo. So if you look very, very closely, there is a polar bear in this photo, and I took it myself. So, all right, next slide, Melissa. Awesome. So I think now we're open to any questions that anyone might have about the work we're doing or our experience here in the Arctic.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ignatius and Bethany. That was fantastic. And thanks for figuring out that animation, Ignatius, and kind of narrating. That was really helpful to see where you guys are and what you're doing. Um, and I love this image as well, just seeing the ice. It's really cool. All right, so we do have some questions for you. So we'll start out. Miss B's middle school and high school students want to know, besides the impact of additional water added to the sea when the ice is melting, what compounds or elements are released into the environment when sea ice melts, and what are the impact of these?
Yeah, so when sea ice melts, it doesn't raise sea level that much since it's already floating on the water. Um, but depending on where it melts, it's basically a redistribution of fresh water across the ocean, which makes a big difference in terms of like the broader global ocean currents. If you have a big chunk of ice melting over, like in the North Atlantic, where the thermohaline circulation is driven, that could, potentially impact, ocean circulation.
Gotcha. Thank you. Um, all right, Bethany. How does experiencing the Arctic environment firsthand compare with the way Arctic habitats are represented or recreated at the zoo? And has that changed the way that you think about how you teach people about these animals and environments back home?
That's a really great question. So, of course, we do our very best, especially at the Detroit Zoo. We have a world-renowned polar bear habitat to mimic as closely as possible the natural environment that a polar bear would experience here in the Arctic, but in Michigan. But there are differences, right? Like there is only so much that you can do to mimic this Arctic environment. But our polar bears serve as really wonderful education ambassadors, and seeing polar bears in the wild yesterday just really reaffirmed my goal of educating with the bears alongside the bears that live at the Detroit Zoo so we can ensure that wild polar bears continue to live and thrive here in the Arctic. So, I think that there will be some cool educational components coming back with me to teach a little bit more and really try to relay the harshness and the desolation of this environment where polar bears thrive.
Nice. Thanks. Um, are you doing any long-term sea ice studies? Are the data sets that you obtain available to the public? And if so, where would we find them?
Yeah, so the data sets, the Arctic buoy program's been around since 1979, and there's been other buoy programs before that of various sorts, but the current Arctic buoy program is the longest continuously running program for internationally actually. So it's wonderful because it's a continuous record, and it's one of the poster childs of long-term monitoring. Um, the data we release it to like the National Weather Service in real time. The buoys report up to the satellite. It comes down to like our Iridium data providers, our satellite data providers, and immediately it gets pushed back out to the operational centers through what's called the World Meteorological Organization Global Telecommunication System. Basically, it's a computer. All the data ends up on this computer, and all the weather forecasts, National NOAA, National Weather Service, the Europeans, grab this data from there, and then we for research we do a little bit more quality control, and it's available on our website. If you just Google Arctic Buoy Program, it should be the first hit, hopefully. Um, and then and then it's archived a myriad of places. Just the minute it goes up to the GTS, all these operational centers save the data, and then we also uh, put it on the Arctic Data Center for the National Science Foundation and all other agencies.
That's great. It's also really good to know that how much you're using the data in real time. I think a lot of us are used to sort of that scientific data. It takes a while to get the data, maybe crunch the data. So the more sort of real time use of it is pretty exciting.
Yeah, when we're flying, like right now, there's Arctic sea ice is melting. There's more open water. There's more navigation. One thing we're realizing is that there's less sea ice and there's more ships, but there's also still some big icebergs out there, and so it's a lot of open water, but there's some pretty big hazards out there that could easily think Titanic. Um, and so in real time we'll get the data from our buoy and fly out to this spot and try to image, like do surveys of this ice from aircraft. So so we use it quite a bit in real time and post processing for research.
Wow, that's really neat. Okay, so kind of a little follow-up to that, Ignatius. So you mentioned that more ice is melting, there's more open water. Sort of what are I guess, the most important trends that you're seeing over the years that you've been, and how long have you been part of this program studying the sea ice?
A while. I was hired as a student at a high school um, in the 80s. And they've kept me on since. It's just one of those things where they hire students out of high school for STEM, anybody interested in science, technology, and they rotated us through different groups within the applied physics lab, and I landed in the Polar Science Center. I was like, oh, this is awesome. It's one of those things where I never thought I'd be a polar scientist. And who I thought I was going to be a fighter pilot or a doctor or your typical job. But yeah, here I am.
Wow, wow. Okay, so you've been with the program for a very long time. And so what are, if there's, one thing that we should know or be able to maybe share with our friends and family about sea ice, what would that important trend or sort of finding be?
And sea ice is probably one of the most critical environmental variables as far as like global climate and climate change. Because it plays a critical role in maintaining the heat balance for the Earth. As we lose more sea ice, more heat is going to be absorbed by the ocean, and the Earth's going to get warmer, which leads to a positive feedback of more melting of sea ice. Yeah, and so in that sense, sea ice is pretty critical for polar bears. The Beaufort polar bear population is listed as threatened right now, and it's mostly due to the loss of sea ice and their habitat and the habitat of their favorite bearded seals,
Ring seals. Yeah. Any
critters.
seal.
Yeah, humans.
The tasty snacks that they like to
Yeah.
find. Excellent, excellent. Um, all right, let's see. Okay, so another question that just came in. So I'm curious to know if specific icebergs are tracked and cataloged. And I think you said yes in some situations. And if is somewhere for non-scientists to see this data and the process of them melting.
That's actually an ongoing research project right now, because for our group, icebergs in the sea ice have been there since, who knows how long, since the Arctic Ocean formed. Um, but and for the most part, when there's a lot of sea ice, the icebergs just move with the sea ice. Um, but now that the ice during summer is looser, the icebergs are doing their own thing just because they have a lot more mass than sea ice. And so when the wind blows them, they don't move as quickly, and the currents, they have a deeper keel, so the currents control them more. Yeah, so it's an ongoing research project, and the data is available on the web, but it's not that easy to find yet and stuff. And so it's like we have a web page where we could we're happy to share. But yeah, since it's kind of a new thing, it's not as well documented for the central Arctic Ocean. But if you go to the North Atlantic, the International Ice Patrol does a wonderful job of showing where everything is, and that's where most of the navigation is. But for the Beaufort, where navigation is kind of a new thing, it hasn't quite been set up yet.
Gotcha. Okay, so more to come on that one.
More to come, and we're working on it. It's because as more ships go in, it's definitely an issue.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so back to the boats, the small boats. Where are boats being found, and how long is it taking them to get there?
Oh, it depends on where we put them out. We work with a lot of icebreakers, and sometimes we'll land on a sea ice and put them out. And so our big deployment areas are here in Barrow, Utqiagvik. And so a few of those have been found by whalers out on just hunting for seals when everything melts out. Um, and then quite a few of the boats that we put out at the North Pole using like the German icebreaker Polar Stern and the French Charcot, the Healy, the US icebreaker Healy. They've been washing up on Iceland and Norway, the Shetlands, Scotland. Some have come around the bottom of Greenland. Yeah, and so this year's been a big year. I think part of it is, our boats are finally making it to the North Pole to the various beaches. Because it takes depending on where we put it out, like from the North Pole, just drift out takes normally about a year. And so since we started ramping up in 2020, they're starting to show up in various beaches. But yeah, Iceland is a big one because the currents that come out of the Arctic go right by Iceland. A lot of things have been washing up there.
Oh, wow, that's really cool. And I think I can't remember if you said this, but each boat has a number on it, and so if people find them, then you can go and look that you can they can enter them into the database on the website, right?
Yeah, it's not quite perfect, but yeah, the theoretically you can enter your that 6-digit number and find your boat.
Nice, nice. And aside from the boats that Bethany brought from the kids in the Amazon and the Detroit Zoo, were there other schools and towns boats that were deployed this week? And can you share that?
Yeah, we brought up boats from five different schools. So there's a Hobson Middle School, there's a Eckstein Middle School from Seattle, um, Calvert High School, and then I'll need to look through my list. But yeah, we had five different schools boats that came out with us.
Nice. Excellent. What advice can you give to students who are interested in pursuing a career in these kinds of fields of study, so polar science, and what experiences and degrees might they need?
Do you want to go?
Yeah. So I think the first and foremost thing is finding something that you love. If you're going to invest your time and your energy and really your life into science, make sure that it's something that you're really passionate about. One other thing that I've learned from meeting a variety of researchers on the team here is there's a really wide variety of disciplines and careers, some that you might not even know exist. There's a team member here who studied oceanography and now she's an engineer. And so what you study may not be what you fall into. So look for what you're passionate about, make connections with people in the field, and I think that will lead you a really long way.
Yeah, and I think, I completely agree. The most important thing is to explore, learn more about yourself. Everybody's different. Like like I mentioned earlier, my mom was thinking I should do your stereotypical degrees, and I was lucky enough to end up at the applied physics lab and rotate through all these different options. Yeah, and that's the main thing is, I've I was lucky enough, we've been lucky enough to find something we love doing. But I never would have thought I'd be a sea ice physicist, geophysicist.
That's great. Um, Ignatius, what has been, maybe you can share one of your like favorite experiences that you've had as a polar scientist. I
Oh,
know yeah, that might be hard, but
yeah, I was just I have so many. Just like each time you come out here, um, it's a little different. It's a little new. Yeah, I think you know, and I think the ones that jump out to me are the stuff outside my field a little bit. So, like I mentioned like in the sunset picture I showed earlier, there's the whale perch. And this is basically where the marine biologists are hanging out, counting whales, using spotting scopes and stuff. Um, and Kate Stafford, she used to be at the Applied Physics Lab, but now she's at Oregon State. Um, it's fun to hang out with scientists of different disciplines, but especially when they're doing their thing. And so we went out there to visit, and we're hoping to get out this year if this blizzard goes away. Um, she basically dropped a microphone into the water to listen for whales. There's nothing out there but bearded seals and other mammals. And it was just the most ethereal thing I've ever experienced. Just hearing the sound coming out of this microphone on this little JBL speaker, boom box thingy. Yeah,
wow.
it was wonderful. Um, yeah, that's probably one of my favorite moments. Um,
That is really cool. Yes, just hearing animals, under the water, like how that's just it's fascinating.
yeah, that's easy. That's I love coming out here, but that's easily in my top three.
Nice. Oh, that's great. Um, okay, Bethany, what about you in terms of thinking about like what you might take back to your learners back in Detroit? Can you think of one or two things like from this experience that you're thinking, oh, this is that I want to take this back to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, after engaging and working with the eighth graders here, it was really cool to see their relationship with the environment. That place-based education is so important, connecting with where you live. So, I definitely want to bring that principle back to the zoo. We have so many beautiful places, although not the Arctic, in Michigan that we should be connecting with, and we should be stewards of that environment. And then also, that idea of remote sensing and having students be able to collect community science data, or what you might call citizen science data, is a really wonderful way for kids to get authentic science practice. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how I might incorporate that into some lessons that I do with learners in the Detroit area.
Excellent. Nice. Um, if you could share one secret of the sea ice that you think everybody should know, Ignatius, what would it be?
Oh, one secret of the sea ice. Um, Boy, that's a tough one. It's got so many secrets. So part of the reason I love coming up here is that every year it's a little different. And and so there's this crazy puzzle that we're trying to like, piece together, and we have a really good picture of what's going on. But these new pieces pop up. And so like in the picture behind me, there's a couple icebergs. That big chunk, those big chunks behind me. You know, this is 2020. That's the first time I've seen an iceberg off Barrow. But like this year, there's nothing out there. And so, everything's just each year it's different. And so it's got so many secrets. Yeah, this is why I'm up here. I'm trying to figure out all these secrets.
Nice. I love that idea that it changes so much every year. I guess I didn't think about that as much as, like year to year, the ice can be totally different.
Yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some things that are, uh, that happen every year and makes sense. And but yeah, things like the icebergs behind me is one of the secrets that just keep popping out. And where did this go? That's the other big trick. It was really fun because these particular icebergs ended up going through Bering Strait and south into the Bering Sea, whereas I thought it would go to the North Atlantic or spin around in the
Okay.
Beaufort Gel. So yeah, so all these secrets.
So many secrets.
Yeah,
We also had a question about wanting to know if the students were collecting data out on the ice or were they doing more exploration? Yeah.
a little bit of everything. Like at our station, we had to measure snow depth and try to figure out, okay, where's the thickest snow depth is? Why is it thicker there? They helped us drill holes. And so they were running around with rulers measuring snow depth. Um, and
How deep was the snow?
It ranged from like 0, where kids were measuring their footprints, to 20 something centimeters. Yeah, quite the range. We were mostly in a flat spot, but if we let them go farther and measure like the snowdrifts behind the ridges, it'd be pretty deep. Yeah, and so they took those measurements, and then we had our ice thickness string, and that thing, like in one picture, you can measure if you just let the weight drop to the bottom, you can measure the ocean depth. Then when you pull up the weight, it catches on the bottom of the sea ice, so you can measure ice thickness. And then if you look at the hole to see where the water's floating, you can measure freeboard. Yeah, all kinds of things. And then at the other stations, different types of data, but like at the kite station, they had infrared images of the sea ice, and you could see where the kids are moving. So you can see the kids.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it was really cool because they had a couple different types of cameras on it. Your visible thing where you can see the people, and then the infrared thing where you could see, footprints and
Mhm.
and warmer colors and stuff.
Wow,
So yeah.
that's great.
And then, yeah, and then the biology station, which is one of my favorite. Maybe I should have been a biologist. But
Biology's so
Kyle,
cool.
yeah, Kyle Delaplane was they were taking cores and pulling them out and dropping dye to see how the dye flows through the core. But also, on the next day they did they looked at the critters from the bottom of the core. So yeah, so lots of different types of data.
Nice. All right, I think we have time maybe for one more question. So I think I'll just kind of ask Bethany and then Ignatius to share sort of the time of this visit. What is sort of the coolest thing, Bethany, that you've experienced or learned? I know it's probably hard to pick one. You could pick maybe one or two, but like, what is one thing that will always stick with you about this visit?
You're right. That's so hard, Melissa. I think the things that I have enjoyed the most are interacting with the researchers on the research team and also the community members, including the students. There are so many different types of knowledge to be shared. Everyone is so welcome and opening to share what they're working on or what their perspectives are about the environment here. And so that collective community effort and that sharing of knowledge has been really wonderful. So I think that has been my favorite. I pick up new little tidbits. My brain um is so full with new information. So it has been really, really exciting.
That's great. That's great. And Ignatius, do you want to maybe share one thing that you've seen, maybe out on the ice, or something that you observed that was different or new or exciting for you this time?
Yeah. So the polar bear, it might seem they usually run from us pretty quick. Like they hear the snowmobile coming and they're gone. And so we don't see them that often. And so when I get to see them, like, in all the years I've been up here, we've seen them maybe 3 or 4 times, where we could actually, make out that. I mean, usually it's just this spot out there. I just see it kind of moving. But this time, we were going to the point, and yeah, there's a lot of bears this year, which is really fun.
Oh, that's great. That's so great. Well, we really appreciate having you all with us and sharing just so much exciting science and information and sharing, just about your whole experience and Ignatius, the work that you've done out there, which is really incredible. I'm gonna screen share one last time here to share. Oops. Um, just share a last, slide with you. Oh goodness. Okay. Sorry about that. We will click through quick little overview and um, okay. And just for folks at home, and we're so glad that everybody was here with us today. And there's lots of different ways to stay connected with Polar's team and what's happening. Social media. The QR code will take you to all sorts of links that will be relevant. But we're just so grateful, Ignatius and Bethany, for your time today and for everybody here for being with us today. Thanks so much, and have a great rest of your time up there out on the ice. Hopefully the blizzard dies down and you guys get back out there soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa, so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks so much. All right. Bye-bye.